Saul approved of their killing him. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city.
Hi everyone, so we are on to Acts chapter 8 today in our series called Acts, a New Reality. Do be chewing over Acts in your own time as we are studying it together on Sundays. There's so much in this incredibly inspiring account of the early church, and it's so timely for the season that we are in right now. So we've seen, haven't we, in Acts chapter 2, the power of Pentecost coming upon the church. We've seen in Acts chapter 4 how they've cultivated incredible community in and out of each other's homes and enjoying the favour of all the people. We've seen in Acts chapter 6 how they've delegated out roles and responsibilities as the church is growing. But, and it's a big but, they were in danger of settling. The clear instructions from Jesus in Acts chapter 1 verse 8 that we looked at a number of weeks ago would still have been ringing in their ears. Those instructions where he said to them, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." But it was just proving a little bit tricky to get up and get moving past the Jerusalem bit. The temple courts were familiar. The apostles' teaching was phenomenal. I mean, these guys were anointed teachers. The corporate prayer meetings, they were powerful. I mean, the rooms shook. Why? Why would you want to leave that? Why would you want to change anything? Well, something changed it for them. And something that they would never have chosen. Something that turned everything on its head and created a new reality. And for them, it wasn't COVID. For them, it was persecution. We heard that brilliant talk last week from Simon Gilbo of how Stephen was martyred by the religious leaders because he accused them of resisting God. And then he had this vision where he said he saw Jesus standing at the right hand of God. You know, it's interesting. Jesus is normally recorded as sitting at the right hand of the Father. But as the world stones the first Christ follower for his commitment to following his Lord, Jesus himself in heaven rises to give Stephen the ultimate standing ovation. And while they were stoning him, he prayed for them. And then at the start of chapter 8, verse 1, it says this, "And Saul was there giving approval to his death." Now we're going to come on to Saul in the next couple of weeks, but that's just worth knowing that's the first time we're introduced to Saul. And then the rest of verse 1 goes on to make this seismic statement. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered. Where? Throughout Judea and Samaria, the very places that Jesus had told them to go. Back in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. It took 8 chapters to fulfill those instructions from chapter 1. To Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. But notice they didn't go willingly. They were forced out of the temple courts where the teaching was phenomenal, where the corporate prayer meetings were incredible. They were forced out of the temple courts, out of what was familiar and onto the Roman roads. And we know, don't we, that COVID has forced us out of our temple courts, out of what was familiar, out of our church venues, and into the Roman roads of our day, the digital space, and perhaps even more strategically into our local neighbourhoods. This is a unique moment in time where the church, the followers of Jesus all around the world, are now more rooted into their localities than ever before. We've got to outwork that great commandment to love our neighbours, to love our actual neighbours, to know their names, to be able to care for them, to be able to go through the journey of life with them. We've been forced to reorder our time to become far more local. Many of us now work from home. Perhaps our weekends are now more based at home. Our leisure time is more based at home. You know, we've used that phrase before, postcode perseverance. Well, now is the time that we are outworking that word through intentional prayer and action. So the early church then, Acts chapter 8, they have been the church gathered, but now they are the church dispersed, the church scattered. They have been a lake church, if you like, but now they are a river church. Churches can grow big lakes, but whilst lakes can look impressive, they have a tendency to stagnate. A river church, now a river stays fresh, it has more impact, it carves out more territory. And I believe this is a moment in history where God is messing about with the edges of some lakes. He's turning them into rivers all around the world. And just like that first lake church of Jerusalem, all gathered together, all in the same spot, they became a river church into the surrounding towns and neighbourhoods, into Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth. We cast a vision back in February 2020 at our church weekend away. Some of you will remember that I talked about us being not a lake church, but a river church. And in that I said, how would it be if we dared to commit to reaching every unreached network and neighbourhood like a net across Loughborough, not going where other churches are working because we believe in collaboration and unity and partnership and there's one church of Loughborough, but where there are so many networks and neighbourhoods where the 93% don't know Jesus and not connected into a relevant expression of church. What would it be like if we dared to commit to planting into those places? You know, we currently have 3 expressions for those of you who perhaps are not so familiar with Open Heaven. Our normal setup is that we have OH1, which is a particularly relevant expression of church for 18s to 30s and normally meets on campus. We have OH2 that normally meets in our building, St. Peter's, and is generations together. We've got loads of young families. In fact, I was just thinking the other day, we've got so many young families that since lockdown started, we've been able to have a different family do our infamous family Bible verse at the start of our live stream every single week. We've got OH3, which is our intercultural expression that normally meets in homes and reaches people from other cultures who might not easily access going onto campus or going into a church building. But there is more for us. You know, we get to experience what it is to be in a loving community. And I just would long for that to be the case for so many more people across Loughborough, to know God's love for them in a personal way that actually gives peace. Peace that works in this current climate of fear and anxiety, where actually a relationship with God gives joy, real joy, not happiness, because happiness happens and it's gone, but joy, deep joy, real joy, where actually there's something that is put inside of us, a peace, a joy, a purpose. We know who we are, we know whose we are, we know where we're going, we know what we're about. And we get to be adopted into a big family. I'm just thinking about what it actually means to be part of the family of God. And I want that for everybody, where people who are battling with addictions get supported, where when a baby comes into the home of a young couple, where they don't need to think about food for the first couple of weeks because dinners just turn up on the doorstep, where we do life together in small groups and we go through the ups and downs of life, where we celebrate all the milestones, but where we stand with each other through cancer treatment and unemployment, people moving house, people starting jobs. We're created for community. We're created to belong. And that's what church gives us. So I want to ask all of us, what would it look like if we were to adopt our block or adopt our street or our neighbourhood and begin to pray and imagine what an expression of open heaven gathering there might look like, bringing more of heaven to earth? It might mean that God calls us to relocate to another part of the town or even further afield because of a real need of kingdom breakthrough in that place. The real success of a church is not its seating capacity, but its sending capacity. So, verse 2, it says, godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. He was a good man and he was deeply missed in the early church. Now, it's interesting, Saul and the religious leaders would have assumed that killing a key leader in the church would have put fear and intimidation into this group of Jesus followers and keep them under control. Normally, when you kill the leaders of a group, you kill the movement. But just to make sure that this movement that was so getting under the skin of Saul, just to make sure that that movement was well and truly stamped out, Saul went on a rampage. And so in verse 3 we read, but Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. Notice the word of the use, church, here. It's not a building. There weren't any. It's not a meeting, but it's people. He says he began to destroy the church, going from home to home. He's consumed with anger and hatred, and so he's going into the homes of Christians and hauling them off to prison. And so the church has to get moving out of Jerusalem. Finally, those words from Acts 1 verse 8, has to get moving out of Jerusalem. And you'd think perhaps with Saul going into homes and dragging off men and women and putting them into prison, you'd think, wouldn't you, that they were leaving Jerusalem and then going into hiding, hunkering down, self-protection. But they weren't. They weren't running away in fear, hoping not to be caught. They were absolutely unstoppable in their passion to tell other people about the Jesus that they knew, the Jesus who had transformed their lives. It was an irresistible and irrepressible passion that couldn't be contained, no matter what the cost. They had a message and they knew it was flipping brilliant, marvellous good news. And there was a power to that message. And they wanted everyone, everywhere to know. So verse 4 says, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. They knew it could have cost them prison or even their very lives, but they don't care. And that's what happens when you have a revelation of eternity, a revelation of, if you like, our own immortality, as Simon talked about in last week. When you know that you're immortal, actually you're a dangerous and a powerful person. This life on earth is just a blip. The only thing we can take with us into eternity is people. Everything else, homes, cars, the stuff of life, it all goes back in the box when the game's over. The only thing we can take is people. And if you really know that and you've got a revelation of that, then people is what you care about most. People is what you're all about. And knowing that the very best way to love people is to give them the single greatest gift on offer in this life, which is a relationship with a God who made them and loves them and died for them in order that they might know full and total forgiveness of everything they've ever thought or done or said that's wrong. To know that peace that goes beyond understanding and to know purpose. And so, verse 5, we see Philip having been propelled out of Jerusalem because of huge disruption. And where does he go? Samaria, one of the places on the list from Acts 1, verse 8. Verse 5, Philip went down to Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. Now, next week, Sarah Ford is going to be speaking on Philip, so I won't say any more. But I want to end this talk with some words from Helen Moses. She is an amazing lady who's part of another congregation in the town, another part of the Church of Loughborough, and she has what's known as a prophetic gift. It's where God speaks to her and gives her messages to then pass on to other people. And she felt she had a message from God for us at Open Heaven, another church, and so she came along to one of our prayer meetings back in November, and she brought this over the mic. This is what she felt God was saying to us as Open Heaven. What promises did I give you years ago when you first heard me say, I want you to plant a church. I want you to build people. I believe he's asking you to press through with those promises and that purpose in a fresh way, which might mean leaving the party early in order to go from purpose to promise. Rather than the success and the enjoyment of all the stuff, because we're busy caring, we're busy loving, we're busy discipling, we're busy doing all sorts of good things, and those things must continue because they're good. But he's also saying press through to get the promises, because there is more land to be taken. And then I was reminded of when Jesus did some amazing miracles in Galilee, and then he slipped away before dawn to pray with his Father. And everyone came looking for him and Jesus and said, Jesus, we need you to do more stuff amongst us. Stay and do more stuff. But he said, no, I have to go. I have to fulfill my Father's purpose. And he sent me to other towns, and I must preach to those too. And so I believe God's calling is, what are the other places he wants you to go to? That might not mean physically moving, but it might. What are the other places or people that he wants you to spend time with and to reach? He's asking you to leave the success for someone else to enjoy so that you can go and fulfill that purpose. So that, I believe, is a really timely message from God to us as Open Heaven Church here in Loughborough. You know, we've just been in Wales, and we went and had a barbecue with the Radbournes a few days ago. And they were saying, you know, of course, they still miss Loughborough, they still miss their friends here. They had to kind of leave the party, if you like, and go to where God was calling them. But they were saying just the deep sense of love that God has been growing in them for the people and the place that they have been called to. And I was just thinking, you know, there's now 60 people that are gathering in under 3 years, this new vibrant community of people that are doing church in a way that probably that island of Anglesey hasn't seen. And people are finding Jesus and getting baptised and getting connected into community. And, you know, Alan and Rach, they could have stayed here and kept on enjoying the party, doing the good stuff, but they followed God's call. And it's costly, of course it's costly, but it's so fruitful. Obedience always brings fruitfulness. And so let me just leave us, as this talk comes to an end, with a verse from John 20, verse 21, where Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. Church, we are pioneers. We're not settlers. We are pioneers.